deeply worrying. Promises are being made and they're not delivered upon. Governments of the right and of the left sometimes think national interests are more important than community solutions. What suffers are the refugees and the cohesion of the European Union. I'd like now, therefore, to give the floor to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear members of the European Parliament, before the briefing on the European Council,
I now give the floor to the President of the Commission, Mr. Juncker.
Sehr verehrter Herr Präsident,
President of the European Council, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues.
along the Western Balkans route, we saw refugees wading through freezing rivers. We saw them sleeping in the rain and mud. Soon, this will be snow and ice. Winter is approaching, and every day counts. Das ist genau die Ursache, Herr Präsident, wieso und weshalb.
This is precisely why, in conjunction with President Tusk, I decided that it was appropriate for us to bring together some member states of the European Union and some 3 additional countries for a summit on the West Balkan route. And I therefore invited them to Brussels. 8 heads of state and government participated in this group from the European Union. The Luxembourg Migration Minister, Mr. Asselborn, participated, and the Dutch representative of the incoming presidency also participated. Obviously also President Tusk was there and President Schulz attended. And the reason that I decided that it was appropriate to hold this summit is that obviously the refugee crisis affects not only the Western Balkan states but also the European institutions, inter alia the European Parliament. And our assistance is absolutely urgent, not least in terms of budgetary contributions. And we must take this action immediately. I'd like to extend my thanks to the European Parliament because all the proposals that have been put forward by the Commission have been taken up by you, and there's been a great deal of pressure of time. But this has enabled the European institutions to take the necessary political decisions and to implement them in an effective way. I also invited Antonio Guterres from the UNHCR and Frontex, and I invited Albania, the former Yugoslavia.
The influence of left-wing extremists in this case. We need to safeguard this consensus. We need to ensure that Europe's pro-democratic forces work together to shoulder the responsibility that is ours to do what is necessary in the circumstances. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you have a question, Mr. Uyhe, to Mr. Weber.
No microphone. Thank you very much, Chairman. I think that this double speech is incredible. Last week at the Congress of the EPP, you agreed with the populistic approach that Mr. Orban represents. One of the members of his party was elected as vice president of your party. So don't blame the socialists. Don't make us responsible, because whatever you've talked about, the national egoism, is to be searched in your party, amongst your members. Stop Mr. Orban, and then I will believe your approach.
Ja, danke schön für die.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if you didn't understand through the interpretation. When we decided on sharing the 160,000 refugees across Europe, Viktor Orban, an EPP prime minister, was against, but so were 3 socialist prime ministers. Viktor Orban said he was opposed, but he was prepared to implement it. Your colleague, your Slovak colleague, Robert Fico, said he wasn't even prepared to implement it. There is no point us simply passing the buck to and fro, because there are very different issues on the table. We need to keep out the influence of extremists in countries like Portugal.
So, das Wort hat jetzt für die Fraktion.
The next speaker on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats is Mr. Pittella.
Presidente Schulz.
Mr. President of the European Parliament, Mr. President of the Commission, President Tusk, I can't conceal my concern about the increase in the number of possible splits and disagreements in the European Union. It's too early to declare the EU dead, but I'm worried about all of the anti-Europeans, the anti-globals, the anti-Islams, the anti-Israelis, the anti-Russians, the anti-immigrants, anti-Europe, all of the antis all together. These movements could have the slogan of saying just I'm against everything. But I think the best way of trying to stop these vociferous movements is to actually do things. Europe will succeed when, as it acts in the way that President Juncker did on the Sunday, when it comes up with real proposals, with real solutions to the problems of the Balkans. Europe will have won when it can show that it is ready to act, as the Parliament showed through President Schulz, to implement decisions that have been taken and implement them speedily. But Europe will in particular have won and will have shown that it can overcome the viruses of nationalism and fear when it's able to come up with responses which are courageous and convincing. I would call upon all pro-European forces in this House to really get together and work together. We need to show our pro-Europeanism now, because the challenge is those who want to destroy things and those who want to try to build things, and build things according to our European ideals. We need to start implementing the list of points given to us by President Juncker this morning. The system for distributing and housing refugees, starting with the hotspot system, which will make the borders of the Union stronger, to defend Schengen, to protect European citizens, not through some nationalistic attitudes and the return to national borders. That's not the way forward. But one of the problems is that we haven't got the greater levels of coordination among member states which we need, as we decided we needed on Sunday. That needs to be brought in. The rights of refugees, as President Juncker said, haven't always been respected. They're just being treated as some kind of inhuman mass which is flowing from one border to another. The states who are most exposed to these migratory flows are spending exceptionally large amounts of money, and as Mr. Juncker said, we can call upon the Stability Pact to help them, and I do encourage the Commission to explore that avenue, so that national budgets don't have to bear this burden all alone as they try to manage our external borders. For when it comes to Turkey, we can't leave Ankara to manage the Syrian crisis by itself, so we need speedily to move forward and apply the action plan for Turkey, but we should be clear that we won't sign a blank cheque for the Erdogan government. It's not impossible that we work with Turkey on the action plan but still try to move forward when it comes to the respect for human rights and freedom of information and the respect for minorities in that country. Finally, as President Tusk said, we're on the eve of the Valletta summit. Too often we've had a simple series of formalities as far as Europe and Africa are concerned. We've been giving the African governments money, they've been trying to stem the migratory flows. But this is now moribund. We need to have a proper partnership, not just one side giving money to the other. We need to start investing intelligently in Africa, investing in African democracy, strengthening African institutions and fighting against corruption, investing in education and making sure that the fruits of growth are allocated fairly. We pro-Europeans should all commit ourselves to do more. We should commit ourselves to do all we can to sort out this crisis before it's too late. And as Danze said, this will be proof of our ability if we can solve this crisis.
Herr Pittella, es gibt den Wunsch des Abgeordneten.
Mr. Christoforo would wish to put a question to you, Mr. Pittella. Is that in order?
President, there is no doubt that we know that millions of refugees need to stay in Turkey and to be looked after. My question to Mr. Pittella is this: does he agree that the refugee crisis is something where all countries have got to show sensitivity, including Turkey? And in this particular case, the fact is that there has been pressure exerted on the EU by Turkey in order to get certain concessions. And it seems to me that we've got to have the full respect of the Ankara Protocol, and before we do anything to accommodate Turkey, we must make sure that they do their bit as well, and they respect their obligations as a candidate country. And certainly there is a humanitarian side, and this is now being abused. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleague. I must say that was really slightly pleonastic, because I said very clearly in my remarks that we have got to send a clear signal to Turkey. We've got to implement the action plan, and at the same time we must advance on the terrain of respect for human rights, freedom of information and minority rights as well. Therefore, it is not in any sense that we are relinquishing respect for our principles, and that extends to the Ankara Protocol. It means also we've got to help Turkey and not leave them alone to face the brunt of the Syrian crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. For the ECR Group now, Mr. Kamal.
Thank you very much.
Lielas paldies.
Programmed, but it's clear from this debate that it's not gone away, and it's not going away anytime soon. But let's be clear, we've got to get away from the well-rehearsed arguments of whether you are pro-European or you're anti-European. Let's get away from the arguments of those who want to do nothing and those who think that we can do everything. So instead of a stop-start approach, let's be clear about what we need to stop doing and actually let's be clear about what we need to start doing. Stop sending out a signal that anyone is welcome. Start focusing on helping those genuinely seeking refuge. Stop driving refugees into the arms of the traffickers. Start helping people nearer their homes. Stop individual countries opening their borders to all one day, forcing others to close theirs, and start being clear about what each country can do and is doing to help. Because we need to face the reality now. This is not just a migration crisis. This is not just a refugee crisis. It is in danger of becoming a geopolitical crisis. In Syria, a proxy conflict is unfolding. Russia doing all it can to destabilise the EU's borders to focus our attention away from the Ukraine. The Balkans in danger of destabilising. So against this background, we've had the Commission 10-point plan. We have the European Council roadmap. And now we have the 17-point plan from Sunday's summit. But all these plans are no substitute for action. So to solve the crisis, we first have to stabilise it, accepting only the most vulnerable, genuine refugees from the camps, as identified by the UNHCR, returning those that seek to bypass that system. But even with such a system in place, we have to take some refugees into our countries. We have a moral obligation. Yet some countries are doing far more than others. Some countries are struggling to cope. Some countries are donating huge sums. Some countries are paying huge bucks, while others are passing the buck. So all countries need to understand the scale of the situation and help with coordinated action. And when I say all countries, I do not just mean all EU countries, I mean all countries. So while we should acknowledge and support the contribution of Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon, we should also be asking, when will the richer Arab countries and the USA step up? Closer to home, EU frontline states and the Balkans need to be helped. Borders need to be strengthened. Money and resources need to go into processing and returns. But we need to be fair but firm, helping refugees close to their homes, welcoming some to our countries, but telling economic migrants to apply through existing legal migration channels and not being seen to jump the queue over those who have applied legally. Let's uphold these principles to save lives rather than encourage people to risk their lives. Do you know, our grandparents confronted the problems of their generation who had fought 2 world wars. They allowed our generation to enjoy a longer period of sustained peace and prosperity than any generation ever before. Never take that for granted, for now our world is changing, shifting power west to east, wars on our doorstep, terrorism at home, living longer but reproducing less. These new challenges will need new solutions. And history has taught us that to face the really big challenges, we need to work together as allies, but stand up to those who seek to dictate to us. Our grandparents had the vision to meet the challenges of their times. Our children will face a whole new set of challenges. So now it's our turn. Our turn to do something for our children and grandchildren. Face today's challenges or retreat to the past. So let's stop sending false hope to the millions thinking of coming here, that they all have a future in the EU. Let's move on from roadmaps and action plans and get on with helping those in need. Let's stop pointing fingers and setting quotas and start delivering. For the sake of the refugees, for the sake of the citizens of our countries, and for the sake of the future stability of this continent.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Colleagues, we are very far behind the original timetable. I just wish to bring to your attention the fact that we're in fact about 30 minutes behind. When we get any requests for the floor, we get a great rash of blue cards. Please recall what the purpose of the blue card is. It is to try and bring about greater clarity, and it gives somebody an opportunity to pose an intermediate question. But what we're seeing is that people are sticking up their blue cards before the person has even been allocated the floor. That's not the point. It isn't the point to get yourself a little more speaking time. Mr. Coburn, you had a question, I believe. Mr. Coburn, you have a question for Mr. Kamal. No great surprise. that you should wish to put one, but I'd ask Mr. Kamal if he would accept the question.
Mr. Kamal, the only way to control the UK's borders, when will you and Mr. Cameron finally get it into your heads that the only way to control the borders is by leaving the EU? Do you have any other method of doing it other than that? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Coburn, it's great to see that you paid attention to what Mr. Schulz was saying about the purpose of these questions. You will have your chance to have your say when the referendum comes. And let us not forget, it was a Conservative government that delivered that referendum, not you guys shouting from the sidelines. Thank you very much.
For
the Liberal group, Mr. Verhofstadt has the floor.
Mr. President, I think that we shall have more and more of these small British interruptions on the British referendum, but applause, applause. Thank you, thank you. So, dear colleagues, the first thing that I want to do is to say to Manfred Weber that this is not a contest, Manfred, this refugee crisis, between liberals, socialists or Christian Democrats. It's not a contest. In any way, we always lose against you, because if you have in your side Orban, who is a tough guy, and Merkel, who show compassion, you always win. And you're always right. The reality, it is not a contest between us. It is a contest between those nationalists and populists who want to abuse this refugee crisis to get rid of Europe and to destroy the European Union. That's the real contest. And not between us. So let's stop to make accusations to say this government and that government. And the problem is the governments in Europe. Because that is what Jean-Claude Juncker has showed in 25 minutes. And I thank him that he has done it in a very detailed way. What he has said was a long list of decisions taken on the European level and not implemented by the member states for months now. When it concerns relocation, not enough have been done. When it concerns the budget, not enough have been done. When it concerns sending civil servants for the external borders, not enough has been done. The problem is not here between political groups. The problem is that member states are still not understanding that on the European level they can only manage this problem. That is what we are facing today. And there we stand together. There is no reason to make a battle between us, because this battle is only good for them there, by their blue cards, to attack the European project. Because it is an existential crisis that can only be overcome if, based on the Commission, Mr. Tusk, now the Council is deciding on what is, in my opinion, the first thing to do, that is the European Border and Coast Guard, so that we can regain control over our borders. That doesn't mean that we have to create a fortress Europe. That means that it is together, in Greece, in Bulgaria, that we have to control the border, register the different refugees who are coming, making the facilities so that they can live in good circumstances and not with the images that we have seen the last days and the last weeks. And it is there that we can make the difference between those who are economic migrants and real refugees. And it is there where we can organize the relocation. So if I have one plea to Mr. Tusk, then it is, let us work together, Mr. Tusk. I know it's not your fault, it is the Council, that at least in the December Council they are deciding on this European border and coast guard, because the Greek border doesn't exist, the Bulgarian border doesn't exist. The Greek border and the Bulgarian border, that's also the German border, the French border, the Dutch border, the Belgian border. It is our common border, so that means it's our common responsibility. And that is what you have to decide. Because it is there where the Balkan route can be stopped. It's not in the Balkans itself, it's on the Bulgarian border. In Greece, there we have to create this European border and coast guard that has to be multinational and that has to deal with registering and at the same time also with the relocation. And the second point, I think, is that in the Council. My proposal to you is don't give them a Christmas break, to your colleagues in the Council. If they cannot decide now on this common asylum system that we definitely need, and at this common economic migration system that we desperately need, because everybody knows that many people are abusing the asylum system at the end to come into Europe. That is at stake. In December, that's in a few weeks, don't give them a break, don't go on holiday, keep them there in that building, that Eastern European building type there in Europe, where the Council for the moment has his seat, and make these three crucial decisions. And finally, and that's my last plea to you, Mr. Tusk, and I know that you are in favour, take the decision once and forever to give a mandate to Mrs. Mogherini to start also initiatives on her level, on the level of Europe, to end the source of this crisis. Nobody talked about it. The source of this crisis is the ongoing conflict in Syria, and we have looked away for years of that conflict. It's time that the European Council gives a mandate to Mogherini to start really, in the name of Europe, to be involved. Because I find it a shame, I find it outrageous that in Vienna, you were there, Mrs. Mogherini, in Vienna a few days ago. In Vienna, there is a meeting, in Vienna, in the middle, in the center of Europe, there is a meeting about Syria, and who is on the table? The US, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And no European around the table. It looks to me that at least in the Congress of Vienna in 1815, was also in Vienna, we were around the table. This time, in the 21st century, we do it in Europe and we are not even present. It's like with the summit in the Azoren, organized by Mr. Barroso about Iraq. There was also no European around the table. And there, in the middle of Europe, not the middle, at the outside of Europe, there was also decided on something. So this time, my plea, let's give a mandate to Mrs. Mogherini, and please, Mrs. Mogherini, use it fully, break the door open of these meetings, and be present and represent the European point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verhofstadt. Without great surprise, Mr. Etheridge has a card. I assume it's for you.
Yeah.
Mr. Etheridge, please fire away.
Seeking clarification from Mr. Verhofstadt. You claim that us with the blue cards, we're terrible people because we try and get this debate going, and you list all the things we're against everything you stand for, and then you list it all: more immigration, more Europe, more state. Surely, sir, the truth is that we aren't against everything, but those of us on this side who seek to get debate going are actually pro-debate, pro-democracy and pro-freedom, whilst being anti-EU and all of the things that you and your friends seek to push forward. Surely, sir, that is the truth, and that is why blue cards and debate are so important and you don't like them.
Cards. I have nothing against blue cards because they are blue, so the color of my group is blue, so I have nothing against. And secondly, I have nothing against blue cards, it's also the color of the European Union. So every time you wave your blue card, I say, yes, we have converted one of these Eurosceptics, he is using the European color. So continue for me, I like your blue cards.
Für die Vereinigte Linke hat jetzt das Wort.
For the United European Left, Mr. Iglesias.
Thank you, President. The first time I took the floor here was 15 months ago, representing the GUI group. It was an honour to do so and to run against you to be President of this Parliament. Since then, we have seen changes in Europe, and we have sought to change Europe to make it less tough on the weak and less complicit with the powerful. I believe that we need to continue that fight that we began 15 months ago. 15 months ago, I talked about Spanish fighters fighting against fascism, those that really sought to see a social democratic Europe come to pass, a Europe that respects human rights. We heard xenophobic cries and statements in this chamber. I made it clear that they would not succeed. Now, I have heard also much hypocrisy, crocodile tears expressed in this chamber when talking about human rights. Mr. Weber, you talked about what might happen in Portugal. Well, should we not respect democracy and human rights? The wishes expressed by Portuguese citizens that may or may not appeal to you. Perhaps I could say something to the Liberals. Now, for 15 months, I do apologise, I've not been able to pronounce your name despite practising in front of the mirror. Now, you talk about Liberals, Democrats, and it is true that you agreed with the other parties on fundamental principles, but what we've seen is misery and humiliation continue. We're here once again to talk about war, families at the borders of Europe. Europeans, we cannot forget what war implies. Poverty, misery. We cannot forget those scourges. If we humiliate those people knocking on our door, we're humiliating Europe. Mr. Weber, we would see an end to the welfare state, social rights, labour rights. We need to call the governments to account when they are in hock to the financial powerhouses. Mr. Juncker, you as Minister for Finance were in support of secret negotiations with multinationals, tax revenue paid of just 1%, where citizens were forced to pay hand over fist. You, Mr. Juncker, and people like you, Mr. Pittella, made it possible for Mr. Juncker to be present here in this chamber. The Socialists and the EPP worked together. So, Mr. Pittella, don't claim to be on the side of the people and put an end to this cursed grand coalition. Let me come back to Spain. Now, I would like to see the Spanish government rid of people like you, and I will return there. But before I leave, let me say that the refugee crisis will not be resolved through policies and tears, but responsible policies. That is what we need, responsible action. Work for peace rather than fostering war. We need to help those fleeing misery. Let's not continue to wreak havoc on the dignity of Europe, Mr. Juncker.
Das Wort hat für die Fraktion.
Now for the Green Group, Mrs. Harms. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Weber, if you really wish to contribute to a constructive solution to the problem, then please give Mr. Seehofer a ring and tell him that instead of always just letting loose in public, he might pick up the phone and talk to Mr. Faymann and Mrs. Merkel now and again. I think that in his position would be a useful thing to do and would be of benefit to all of us. Let me try first of all in this debate to get something straight. I don't think that we are primarily dealing with a deep crisis of the European Union. Crisis, war, this is what's going on outside of the European Union at the moment, and many other peoples have encountered far more problems than we are experiencing in the European Union hitherto. And if we don't keep trying to conflate this and talking always about our own problems first of all, we'll never be in a position to actually contribute to a solution to the problem in Syria or the environment or Sahara or in the Mediterranean. And it's pretty terrifying for me how navel-gazing we are in our discussion. So I think the big pressure of problems that we're experiencing at the moment and that we keep talking about is really the result of the wrong refugee and migration policy that we've been pursuing now for decades. The European Union felt far too comfortable for too long with this Dublin regulation, which tended to try and limit the issue to the border countries, the countries on the margins of Europe. And if we hadn't had ourselves shaken up by ships and boats going down on the Mediterranean, then we would have maintained this basic level of indifference vis-à-vis the problem in the Mediterranean. So it's not easy at this stage to switch off that way of thinking and to get past our indifference. But I do think that the European Union is strong enough to do that were we to stop trying to break up the European Union as part of that effort. I think, Mr. Juncker, that it is right that the decisions have been taken to do more to help resolve the situation, improve the situation for refugees in Turkey and also in other neighbouring countries to Syria. But what I think is wrong, and this is an old mistake, is that in the attempt to do something right, you ally yourself with a man who in his country is doing exactly the wrong thing. I'm talking here about President Erdogan. There's a big media group in Turkey which has been taken, which has been occupied by the police right now in Turkey and has AKP people put in place. So think very carefully about what you wish to do in continuing with Turkey. I think that the Balkan summit that took place last weekend was quite right, and I think we've finally managed to admit, and this is a bit of a breakthrough, that along the Balkan route we've got a humanitarian catastrophe situation, and the European Union now, right now, is responsible for ensuring that we bring people an opportunity to, because their countries have been destroyed, and the European Union is a space in which it is possible to function to the benefit of citizens. I would only underscore at the same time that I also believe, quite apart from solving the acute problems, that we need to think about long-term changes as well. What are we going to get in place of Dublin? What will future refugee and immigration policy look like in Europe, and how are we going to arrange our borders in such a way that we don't just shut ourselves off or militarize ourselves, as sometimes happens under Frontex, but that we guarantee European values, fundamental rights, and that we bring about a greater degree of, or a new degree of openness in the construction of this new European border policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Harms. Für die
Thank you. On behalf of the EFDD, now Mr. Farage.
This migrant crisis begins to overwhelm the European Union, and yes, it is an existential crisis. Perhaps we should ask ourselves, what really is the true nature of this project? Because I've heard a lot today about rights. Well, what about democratic rights? Because I think what we're seeing is an increasingly authoritarian European Union that crushes democratic rights and then actually crows about it. Every single time there's a crisis, it's national democracy that loses. We saw back in 2011 the Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi, sounding Eurosceptic, removed and replaced by a puppet Prime Minister. We saw exactly the same thing happen in Greece in 2011. Mr Papandreou threatened a referendum on Euro membership. There was a coup against him. He was replaced by a puppet. In this migrant crisis, we've seen 4 countries, led, I guess, by the strongest, Hungary, making it clear they want no part of EU migrant quotas, only to find themselves crushed through EU trickery and made to accept the very thing that they'd said no to. And I'll never forget seeing the Greek Prime Minister, Mr Tsipras, sitting just over there, having won a general election, and then come to this House to be told the manifesto was unacceptable and it must be ditched. But I think all of this has reached a new low this week with Portugal. Virtually unremarked upon by the media, And yet, for those that don't know, there is now, following the general election, a left-wing majority with a socialist plan for Portugal, and yet the President of Portugal, Mr Silva, is refusing them office on the grounds that they represent anti-European forces, and is allowing the minority Conservative pro-EU Prime Minister to stay in place. This is the modern-day implementation of the Brezhnev doctrine. This is exactly what happened to states living inside the USSR. What has been made clear here with Greece and indeed with Portugal is that a country only has democratic rights if it's in favour of the project. If not, those rights are taken away. And perhaps none of this should surprise us. As Mr Juncker has told us before, there can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. And the German finance minister, Mr Schäuble, has said elections change nothing. There are rules. I think for anyone that believes in democracy, Portugal should be the final straw. It should be the warning that this project, to protect itself and all its failings, will destroy the individual rights of people and of nations. My country has always believed in parliamentary democracy so strongly that twice in the last century it risked everything to fight for parliamentary democracy, not just for Britain, but for the rest of Europe too. And I actually believe that for all of us that believe in democracy and want to see it re-implemented, the British referendum offers a golden opportunity.
Go ahead.
Mr Farage, you compared the situation in EU country Portugal with the situation in previous USSR. I know you don't have experience of living in USSR. We have. Can you please bring example where Brezhnev or somebody else leading Soviet Union was confronting results of democratic elections in one of USSR republics or members?
Well, actually, although I have to say I wasn't around at the time of the Hungarian uprising, it did happen, and we saw a similar one happening in Czechoslovakia in 1968. And just let me tell you what the Brezhnev Doctrine says, shall I? Because I'm sure you remember it. It says, when forces that are hostile to socialism try to turn the development of a socialist country towards capitalism, it becomes not only a problem of the country concerned, but a common problem and a concern of all socialist countries. I think what you need to do is cross out socialist and put European Union, and it fits like a glove.
On behalf of the ENF, Mr de Graaf.
Voorzitter, mevrouw Merkel.
President, when Chancellor Merkel last week, she went to visit the Sultan of Turkey, and in so doing she sealed the fate of Europe. Turkey gets fast-track access to the European Union in exchange for restricting the flow of migrants. This rings the bankruptcy of democracy, where Germany simply decides for everyone else. The EU abolishes itself and becomes incorporated in a new Ottoman Empire. External borders cannot be made 100% watertight, and yet the restoring internal borders is taboo. The European elite would rather sell itself out to the beast of Ankara. Forget human rights. As Erdogan bombards his own people, as he cooperates with ISIS, abolishes democracy in Turkey, and stifles freedom of expression in violence. Only in 1913 were the Turks definitively expelled from the Balkans, and only then did the murder and rape of Christian populations end. And this, the EU is bringing back the wars of religion. With Islam, children are raped as brides, women are second-class chattels, and infidels are persecuted and murdered. When Mrs Merkel says that Islam belongs to Europe, She repudiates all the Christian and humanitarian values of Christendom and makes herself complicit in the abuse in detention centres with rapes, persecution of Christians on a massive scale. And that's going to happen in every town and every village. That is Islam, a takeover of the West. And we must stop the invasion, seal the borders, and Turkey must never become a member of our EU. Thank you very much.
Now, on behalf, now we will hear from the non-attached member, Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. President. In listening to this morning's debate, I hope that what we have heard is a more realistic approach to the issues facing European nations in dealing with the flows of refugees and migrants currently heading towards Europe. I understand that many of those coming are fleeing persecution, but I fear that the initial response by some European nations may have consigned even more vulnerable people to trafficking and exploitation by criminal gangs. President Tusk, you focused this morning on the matter of securing borders, concluding that even though deals with third countries are possible, no third country can replace us in protecting our external borders. President Juncker, you indicated that we need to slow down the uncontrolled flow of people. If this is a more realistic approach, it is late but welcome. Of course, it is only part of the answer. It requires a dual approach, stability in the region and promoting policies to encourage economic growth. However, I am perturbed by the tone of some of the leaders' comments in this debate this morning. And let me address Mr Weber's intemperate outburst on behalf of my constituents in the United Kingdom. We are not a nation of the extremes, but a compassionate people who have mandated our government to give aid to the Syrian refugee crisis. In fact, we are the second largest bilateral donor of aid to the refugee crisis in Syria and one of the few countries working to fulfil our Millennium Development Goals. Finally, it is disgraceful that from the President of Council and Commission this morning, while we've heard much about the role of European nations and the need for ever more funding from those European nations, you have ignored the potential contribution of the Gulf states in resolving this very difficult situation. It is time we ensured that these states stepped up to the mark and took on their moral responsibility to deal with this crisis along with the rest of us. Thank you.
We will now hear from Mr Royal from the EPP. President, colleagues, the issue of refugees, this is a huge problem, there can be no doubt. From morning to evening I hear about how complicated this is. I hear finger pointing who is responsible. I hear others say what were the mistakes done in the past, and then we have the Commission and Council working on tangible steps, and then nothing happens at the end of the day. That is what bothers people. It is our job to resolve problems, not discuss them, not just pay lip service to them. People will have a different attitude if they see their politicians taking action, if they see the problems being resolved, steps being implemented. Now, this is something that concerns other fields too, not just the refugee issue. if we could see action and problems being resolved, then we would see fewer problems at European level. So we now have tangible steps agreed on Sunday. We saw a meeting scheduled where those involved came round the same table. Not everyone attended. There were shortcomings. Not all decisions went as far as they could, but tangible action has been agreed upon to help people to tackle the difficulties to hand. And so I would just issue an appeal to Council, Commission, Parliament, and Council has the biggest task here. My appeal to you is now live up to your commitments, pay out the funding, give the Member States the leeway to take action, and ensure that the Frontex guards can take action, that they can put that plan into operation. So thank you very much. This was a first step, and we need to take the second step and get this right.
Dragi colegi, vreau să vă spun înainte să-i dau cuvântul colegei Fayon, before I give you the...
Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to Mrs. Fayon, I would like to launch an appeal, which is to everyone, please respect the speaking time, because we are behindhand, and we've got the vote, and our guests are here. President Tusk, President Juncker will be speaking at the end, and likewise the vote is going to be a major exercise, and then there is another debate at 3 p.m. So I would launch an urgent appeal to everyone to please respect the speaking time. Now, Madame Fayon, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. August Assembly, I have visited the reception centers at the Slovenian borders. I stood by the line of thousands of tired, ill refugees. Look at the footage. These are people. But who are those that drive them back into the cold river during the night? Is Croatia not liable to respect European rights? Croatia requested additional tents yesterday. Whenever I speak about tolerance and solidarity, I lack credibility. Whenever I talk to my Slovenian constituents, European leaders are undermining my credibility. The sending of migrants to unnotified spots is unacceptable. In the past 10 days, 80,000 people entered Slovenia. This is just as much as if there were 3.2 million people entering Germany. Slovenia will be forced to kneel. Chaos will arise. And the predictions of the intolerant xenophobes will come true. It is not true that things cannot be done. Some people don't want to do that. I suggest that people who do not want to take decisions, let the decision-making be in the hands of those who have hearts, common sense and courage.
Mr. Legutko, 2 minutes.
Mr. Legutko, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the numbers do matter, but I'm afraid the numbers do not balance. It is said that this year 700,000 migrants have come to Europe, but we've been also told that 800,000 people have come to Germany, that every day 5,000 people cross the Austrian border. And there are also the Balkan countries, there are the Mediterranean countries, and one doesn't have to be very strong in mathematics to know that the first number, 700,000, is not correct, and it should be higher. Chancellor Merkel said in this chamber that in the next years about 60 million people will probably leave their homes in the turbulent areas in the search of a better future elsewhere. And President Tusk said that what we have been going through now can be compared to the great migration of peoples from the prehistoric times. If at least a third of those 60 million people will come to Europe in the next years, we will have a new medium-sized nation on our territory. So what conclusions can we draw from these numbers? First, by avoiding the problem of numbers, the politicians, I'm afraid, conceal the gravity of the issue. Second, the instruments that the EU proposed are certainly not adequate. And third, I have an unpleasant feeling that the instruments are used more to assert the EU power over nation states than to face what is possibly the greatest challenge that Europe has confronted since the end of the World War II. So this strategy failed, but it is hardly a consolation in view of what the future might bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dupré for 1.5 minutes. Mr. President, first and foremost, can I congratulate the President of the Commission, congratulate you for the initiative you took and the 17 measures which were adopted. Those who, like you, saw these terrible images of refugees, men, women, children, going chest through a freezing river know that this is the humanitarian response. That said, 2 reflections. The external frontier is a common one, as you reminded us, and what's common has to be managed on a commonality basis. And Frontex, with its current mandate, its statute, is it really able to do that? Frontex, in its present form, is really a supplicant, which goes cap in hand to member states to request assets, boats, expert coast guards. It's not an operator capable of organising. We've got to put an end to this facade. If the common border is going to be a common police and a common border, then Frontex's mandate's got to be looked at again, dusted down, common procedures, a common coast guard under the authority of a common operator. You also recalled the need to cooperate with transit countries, in particular Turkey, and I would agree. But negotiations with Erdogan, under the pretext of combating terrorism, bombards the Turks, and that plays into the hands of ISIS. They're not doing it. Erdogan is doing nothing about the Bodrum smuggling industry, which has grown up. The only rule we must respect. The European Union, in response, if the Turks respond in the current outlook approach, then we've got to respond, looking at the prevailing winds as well. Thank you very much. Mrs.
Thank you. The Slovene police used tear gas against refugees. That's a liberal government in Slovenia. In Hungary, you have a party in power that belongs to EPP and uses dogs and other weapons at their borders. On the 17th of October, the Bulgarian police shot and killed a Pakistan national at their border. But I think what really embodies the way the EU treats refugees is the Czech government, which is marking, putting a stamp on the arms of the refugees and rounding them up in something akin to concentration camps. The European Union is supposed to respect human rights, but what we are seeing is total disrespect for human rights. We should ensure that the different political groups here expel the member parties that are abusing human rights. So, Mr. Patella, Mr. Weber, your groupings, your member parties are undermining solidarity and destroying human rights. Thank you.
Mrs. Keller, 1 minute.
Excuse me. Avem un blue card. Acceptați un blue card?
Sorry, blue card. You accept blue card.
Mr. Peterle.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have to react to this very pretentious gossiping of my colleague about Slovenia. I would like to ask her the following. How would you react if a conflict situation arose between migrants themselves? We had to handle this to prevent this from spreading into something worse. The Slovenian police acted in a responsible manner.
Yo creo que actuar
I believe that if we wish to be responsible, we must respect human rights and should not use tear gas on those fleeing war and barbarity. That is not the way in which you respect human rights.
Keller, 1 minute.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. 1 minute.
Thank you. Actually, and unusually, I'm not all that disappointed of what came out on Sunday, I have to say, unlike Mr. Schulz or some other voices here, because finally the heads of state present have at least realized that we have a humanitarian crisis at hand. I mean, it should be obvious that refugees need shelter, food, water, the things you've mentioned, Mr. Juncker, but for once, finally, we have it in the conclusion, so let's hope that all of those things are finally going to be delivered. And I'm also happy that the Geneva Convention and complying with the EU law was highlighted. I'm just not sure how you're going to bring that together with sending people back to Afghanistan, because Afghani refugees are recognized as refugees inside the European Union. They almost fulfill the threshold of 75% to be eligible for relocation. So Afghanistan certainly is not a safe place. And again, unfortunately, the mini-summit on Sunday failed to address the crucial questions of a new and fair distribution system, fair for member states and for refugees, and the question of legal access. Those are the issues we actually need to address, not some weird Fortress Europe issues.
Mulțumim. Domnul Paksas, 1 minut.
Thank you very much. Mr. Paksas, 1 minute.
Pirmininke, kolegos, 3 pastebėjimai po viršūnių.
Mr. President, 3 comments in the wake of the summit. First of all, finally, an admission has been made that Europe hasn't protected its external borders hitherto, and the decision has been taken that measures must now be put in place to ensure that that can be dealt with. Secondly, there will be 10 billion euros made available by the Council for the African and Asian countries in the hope that that will help put a stop to the flow of migrants. That's naive. Thirdly, colleagues, we need a new migration policy which will only allow borders to be open to refugees fleeing war regions, and these decisions on the accommodation of refugees from some member states and their governments also needs to be clarified. We mustn't turn a blind eye to the fact that the situation is different from the way it looks.
Mr. Briouard, 1 minute.
President, we are seeing summit after summit in Europe, and the refugee flows are unstoppable. The mayor in Calais talks about exceptional cultural riches, but now we're seeing inhabitants having to move house because they are at the mercy of aggressive refugees. So that is what we have in the European Union, and the European Union shoulders full responsibility, as do the servile governments that do not protect their own borders. The summit will not change anything because it insists that it will foster legal migration channels and the strengthening of protection for migrants. These are irresponsible proposals. I, on the contrary, would be in favour of immediate suspension of the Schengen Agreement, reintroduction of checks at national borders so that migrants can be placed in detention centres and immediately sent back to their home countries. There we have a clear message for migrants.
Pitideos, 1 minute.
Mr. Pitideos, 1 minute. Thank you very much, Mr. President. The decisions which were taken by the Council are the result of the panic which has overtaken the leaders of Europe because of the sudden and massive influx of illegal immigrants. And the only thing which the summit was able to do was to upgrade the role of Turkey, a country which to a large extent is responsible for a worsening of the migration problem. Instead of the European Union saying, Turkey, you are a candidate, you don't meet the Copenhagen criteria, Instead of saying you must meet your obligations, what they're doing is allowing thousands of illegal immigrants to find their way into Greece. And at the same time, through Chancellor Merkel, they are being offered, Erdogan is being offered 3 billion euros, even though he was not happy with that and wanted more, in fact twice that amount.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. Zgadzam się w pełni z diagnozą, którą...
President, thank you very much. I agree fully with Mr. Tusk's diagnosis. Migration is something that is changing, has changed the EU, the internal balance of power within the EU, as well as the political scene in specific member states. If our estimates of the number of migrants are correct, what the specific amount is irrelevant. The migrants are an existential challenge for all of us in all our countries. And I think it is good the EU has agreed we should help migrants at the source in the countries of the Middle East and Africa, and such decisions have already been taken. It is good we have all agreed that our priority should be to protect our borders. We cannot help those who are already in the EU if our borders are as porous as they are now, because this only is a pull factor for those who want to come to Europe from places like Syria, for instance. We have agreed on help 1 billion euros for migrants in the Middle East. Is this enough? Probably not. We also need to help Turkey. Turkey is already home to 2.5 million refugees. Maybe if we help Turkey, Turkey will put a stop to this migration pressure which is put on us now. We may hope to see the situation in Syria improve. We have to do our utmost, to our share. We have to cooperate with the UN in order to combat this great international crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you accept the blue card?
Do we have a... Yes. Okay, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable colleague, you avoided figures and specific numbers, but I still have a question. Do you have specific figures at your disposal or ratios of migrants? How many are really those who are eligible for asylum, and how many of them are the ones that we should return home?
Szanowny kolego, ja nie mówiłem o tym.
Well, dear colleague, I haven't mentioned any specific groups or breakdowns, how many of those are refugees or economic migrants. This still requires an in-depth analysis. If we had a normal system for registration of migrants, we don't know. We know now 700,000 people up to September this year, but any analysis to be carried out still needs to be carried out, and the representatives of the Council and Commission have already said that we need assistance of experts who would help us. Who are the migrants or refugees? Thank you.
Mr. Fleckenstein, 1 minute.
Mr. President, colleagues, I don't want to just talk about the leaders' meeting. It's amazing what we've had to consider to be a success, so let's leave that there. But I would like to thank the Commission, and in particular Mr. Timmermans, for the negotiations that are being conducted with Turkey. I think you've earned that praise because, first of all, you have been trying to get to grips with the Syrian refugee issue for a long time, and then you've also been putting in place the measures required to make it happen and to help refugees and those that are going to be welcoming them. But we shouldn't just throw our values overboard in this process, because we also have to realize at the same time that morality isn't going to solve the problem on its own. And there are two things I would ask of you. That we should try, first of all, to work with USA and Iran and Russia to try and bring an end to the war in Syria, and we'll only do that if we are pragmatic in our approach.
Mr. Marias has got 1 minute. President Juncker, in 5 days last week, and despite the storms, the island of Lesbos got tens of thousands of new refugees, despite the fact that the population of the island itself is only 70,000, 80,000 people. Now, compared to the population of each country and percentages issued by the European Council, we now have much higher a percentage than was agreed in the redistribution key. And this is at a time when the memorandum has borne down so hard on the country. Greece cannot be turned into a huge favela for immigrants and refugees. And this you clearly have to understand. President Juncker, you must understand that protecting the sea borders is for the sovereign authorities of Greece and not anyone else. We must stop accommodating Turkey because they are tolerating the trafficking networks. Thank you very much.
Mr.
Juncker, thank you for staging the leaders' meeting on Sunday. It was very useful. I did not like very much your critical tone regarding the heads of state and governments along the Western Balkans route. You should be critical towards everyone. The leaders of those countries are dealing with a 100% problem that exceeds their capacities. Therefore, they were nervous. Yet the meeting was useful. My country, Slovenia, is a small country. It lies along the Western Balkans route, the route taken by more than 10,000 different refugees and migrants. Today we are all along the Balkans route. We are facing a problem that was not caused by nature or the fate. It is a problem caused by catastrophic decisions made by politicians. The masses of people coming from unfortunate countries are here. They came to us as used to was also in the past. Also in the past we accepted many people of